He didn't say a word. He just picked up the stack of $100 bills, every single one of them, and slid them back across the workbench like they were nothing. The billionaire stared at him. Nobody did that. Nobody. "My daughter will walk again," the man in the expensive suit said, his voice shaking between rage and desperation. "Name your price." Ethan Cole wiped the grease from his hands, looked him dead in the eye, and said the four words that would change everything. "She's not for sale." What happened next in that garage, nobody saw coming. Drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you believe in the kind of hope that nobody can buy, hit subscribe. You're going to want to see where this goes. The first thing people noticed about Ethan Cole was his hands. Not his face, not his build, his hands. They were the hands of a man who had spent 20 years solving problems that other people gave up on. Calloused at the knuckles, permanently stained with oil that no amount of scrubbing fully removed, scarred along the right thumb from a belt tensioner that slipped back in 2009 and took a half-inch of skin with it. They were rough. They were real. And if you watched those hands long enough, you'd notice something strange. They were never still. Even when Ethan was just standing there, thinking, his fingers moved, like they were always working through a problem nobody else could see. He ran Cole's Auto and Machine Repair out of a converted two-bay garage on the edge of Millhaven, Ohio. Population? About 12,000, depending on who you asked, and whether you counted the people who'd left and never came back. It wasn't a glamorous town. It wasn't a dying town either. It was the kind of town that just quietly kept going, year after year. The same diner on the corner, the same 3 stoplights on Main, the same faces at the gas station every morning. The kind of place where people knew your business, whether you shared it or not. Ethan had been there his whole life. 35 years old, single, a father. His daughter Gracie was 8. She lived with him in the apartment above the garage. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen that smelled like motor oil, no matter how many candles her grandmother sent at Christmas. Gracie didn't mind. She'd grown up with that smell. She thought all homes smelled like that. One time she went to a sleepover at her friend Kayla's house and came back the next morning wrinkling her nose, saying, "Kayla's house smells weird, Daddy. Like nothing." Ethan had laughed for the first time in weeks that night. He was the kind of man who didn't talk much unless he had something to say. His employees, just 2 of them, Ray and a 22-year-old kid named Marcus, who was still learning which end of a wrench to hold, had learned early on that when Ethan went quiet, it meant he was thinking, not checked out. He wasn't cold. He wasn't distant. He was just precise. He didn't waste words any more than he wasted parts. That was the thing about Ethan. He didn't waste anything. It was a Tuesday morning in early October when the black car pulled up. Not a regular car, a Bentley Continental. Obsidian black, custom wheels, tinted windows so dark you couldn't see through them even in full daylight. It pulled into the gravel lot in front of Cole's and sat there for a moment, engine running, not moving, like whoever was inside was deciding whether this place was actually worth getting out of the car for. Ray was the first to notice. He was elbow deep in a transmission rebuild and looked up when the gravel crunched wrong. Too smooth, too quiet. He looked at the car, looked at Ethan, and said what they were both thinking. "That ain't a Millhaven car." Ethan didn't answer. He was already watching. The rear door opened first. A man stepped out, late 60s, silver-haired, dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Ethan's truck. He was tall, He had the posture of a man who had spent decades in rooms where everyone else stood a little straighter than necessary. His face was carefully composed, the kind of compose that takes years to perfect, that looks like calm, but is actually control. His name, Ethan would learn, was Richard Bennett. And if you lived anywhere in the state of Ohio, you knew that name. Bennett Industries, commercial real estate, manufacturing contracts. The Bennett Foundation, which had donated enough money to the regional hospital system to get 2 wings named after the family. Richard Bennett was the kind of wealthy that stopped being about money a long time ago and became something else, a kind of weight that bent everything around it. He walked toward the garage with the deliberate step of a man who is accustomed to people moving out of his way. But he stopped before he reached the bay door. He turned back to the car. The second door opened, slowly, carefully. And then the wheelchair came down on the gravel. One of those high-end motorized chairs, matte black, clearly custom-fitted. And the young woman in it moved toward the garage without looking at her father, without looking at anyone. She was maybe 26, 27, dark hair pulled back, fine-boned, with the kind of face that would have been striking anywhere, but her expression was somewhere far away. Not sad exactly, more like evacuated, like she had packed up everything valuable inside herself and moved it somewhere safe and sealed the door. She was wearing a gray hoodie, sleeves pulled down over her hands, even though it wasn't cold yet. Her posture in the chair was practiced, the posture of someone who had spent years learning how to look like they weren't in a wheelchair, which is its own particular kind of exhausting performance. She didn't speak when she came through the bay door. She looked around the garage once, briefly, the way you look at a waiting room, not really seeing it, just clocking it. Ethan watched her for exactly 3 seconds. Then he looked at Richard Bennett. "Help you with something?" Richard stepped forward. His jaw was set. There was something working behind his eyes. Grief, maybe, or the thing that grief becomes after enough years, when you still haven't fixed it. He reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope and set it on the workbench between them. Thick, white, no writing on the outside. "Open it," he said. Ethan didn't move. "Mr. Cole!" Richard's voice was the voice of a man who was not accustomed to repeating himself. "Open it." Ethan wiped his hands on the shop rag. Slow. Then he reached over, opened the envelope, and fanned the contents out on the workbench. $100 bills, bundled. Ethan didn't count them, but he knew what $100,000 looked like from the thickness of it. The garage went quiet. Even Ray had stopped moving. "My daughter," Richard said, "requires the use of an exoskeletal mobility device. I've heard you've been building something. I have sources. I don't need to explain my methods." He paused. "I want to acquire it. Whatever you need on top of that figure, equipment, materials, a facility upgrade, you'll have it. I want the device in a proper medical environment within 60 days. Ethan looked at the money. Then he looked at the young woman in the wheelchair, still not watching them, her eyes tracing the far wall of the garage like she was reading something written there that only she could see. Then he looked back at Richard Bennett, and he pushed the money across the workbench. Not hard, not dramatic, just pushed it back, like returning something that didn't belong to him. "No," he said. Richard stared at him. Behind them, Ray exhaled softly through his nose, the sound of a man watching someone either do something incredibly brave or incredibly stupid, and not yet sure which. "Excuse me?" Richard's voice dropped half an octave. It was a quiet kind of dangerous. I said no. Ethan pulled his cap off, ran a hand through his hair, put it back. Whatever you heard wrong. There's nothing here for sale. Mr. Cole. Richard's composure was cracking at the edges now, just slightly, just enough. I don't think you understand what I'm offering you. I understand it fine. Ethan's voice was level, unhurried. And I'm still saying no. The silence stretched. And then, for the first time since she'd come through the door, the young woman in the wheelchair spoke. Dad. Just the one word, but the way she said it, the weight in it. It wasn't a plea. It wasn't embarrassment. It was something older than that. The sound of a person who has watched the scene play out so many times that they've stopped feeling it and started just documenting it. Richard turned to her. His composure fractured just slightly, the way a pane of glass goes right before it gives. Ava. Stop. She turned the chair slowly to face Ethan directly. Her eyes found his for the first time. Dark brown eyes, intelligent, exhausted. And underneath that exhaustion, something else. Something banked down and tamped hard, like embers under wet ash. I'm sorry, she said to Ethan. Her voice was clear, steady. He does this, shows up places and puts money on things he wants fixed. She glanced at her father without heat, just observation. It's the only tool he knows. Richard opened his mouth. I want to go, Ava said. Ava, we discussed. I said I want to go. Not loud, not sharp, just final. She turned the chair back toward the door and moved through the bay without another word. Richard stood there for a moment, his jaw working. Then he looked at Ethan, and for one unguarded second, the composed businessman dissolved entirely, and what was underneath was just a father. Tired, scared, holding something he didn't know how to fix. She hasn't walked in 3 years, he said, quietly, like it cost him something to say it out loud. 3 years. Every specialist, every facility, every experimental program in this country and 2 others. He stopped. And you have something in this garage that might... I don't have anything, Ethan said. He said it clean, not mean, not cold, just closed. Richard picked up the envelope from the workbench. He looked at it once, then he tucked it back into his jacket and walked out. The Bentley was gone in under a minute. Ray waited a full 30 seconds before he spoke. Ethan, don't. 100 grand, man. I said don't. Ray shook his head slowly and went back to his transmission. Ethan stood at the edge of the bay door and looked out at the empty gravel lot for a long moment. His fingers were moving again, working through something invisible, and his jaw was tight in the way it got when he was working against himself. Then he turned around, walked to the back of the garage, through the door marked private, the one Ray and Marcus never went through, and pulled it shut behind him. The back room was where Ethan lived his other life. It was cluttered in a completely different way from the garage. The garage was organized chaos. Parts sorted by system, tools hung in specific places, a logic to every surface, even if it wasn't visible to strangers. The back room was something else, something more like a mind than a workspace. Drawings covered 3 of the 4 walls, some on paper, some on drafting vellum, some on the backs of old invoices. They were technical, but they weren't sterile. There were notes in the margins, corrections, whole sections crossed out and redrawn. A whiteboard on the south wall was covered in force calculations, joint angles, load distributions. In the center of the room, on a steel work table, sat the frame. It was roughly the size and shape of a person's lower body. Articulated joints at the hip, knee, and ankle. Each one engineered to replicate natural movement, not just approximate it. Pneumatic actuators, custom fabricated brackets, a control unit mounted to one side, still exposed, wiring visible. Not finished. Not close to finished, in the way that something is not close to finished when, every time you solve one problem, it reveals 3 more, and you keep starting over and over until you've lost count of how many versions ago the first version was. Ethan sat down on the stool beside the table and put his hands on his knees and looked at the frame for a long time. He wasn't thinking about the money. He was thinking about a girl named Lena, his sister, 14 years older than him, born with spina bifida, which meant she'd been in a wheelchair as long as Ethan had been alive. She died 6 years ago, not from the spina bifida, but from the complications that stack up over decades in a body that carries more than its share. She was 43. She'd been one of the sharpest, funniest, most stubbornly alive people Ethan had ever known, and he had started building this thing, this frame, this machine, 3 weeks after her funeral, in the depth of a grief that needed somewhere to go. He'd never told anyone that. He'd told Ray the frame was a project, a mechanical challenge, something he was tinkering with. Ray had accepted that, because Ray was a man who understood that some projects weren't really about the thing you were building. The truth was, Ethan didn't fully know what he was building it for. Not yet. He knew the mechanics. He knew the engineering. He'd taught himself biomechanics through textbooks and online courses and a lot of failed prototypes. He knew the theory of how a device like this could work, how it could read residual muscle impulse, how it could translate that impulse into controlled movement, how it could take a body that still had intention, but had lost the pathways to execute that intention, and rebuild those pathways externally. He knew all of that. What he didn't know was what he was going to do with it when he was done. And right now, staring at the frame, he kept seeing something he hadn't expected. He kept seeing Ava Bennett's eyes. She came back 4 days later. Alone this time. No father, no car. She'd taken what looked like a rideshare from somewhere, and she pulled up to the garage in the middle of a Thursday afternoon when Ray and Marcus were both out on a pickup job and Ethan was alone. He was under a lifted F250 when he heard the gravel. He slid out on the creeper, looked at her, and said nothing. She said nothing either for a moment. "I don't want to be here," she said finally. "I want that to be clear." He sat up, set his ratchet down. "Okay." "My father doesn't know I came." "Okay." She looked at the bay door, then back at him. "He means well. He just—" She stopped. "He treats every problem like it's a transaction. Like if he finds the right number, everything gets resolved." Her voice was measured. She'd clearly had this conversation with herself many times. "And I've let him do it for long enough that I don't actually know anymore if I want to get better, or if I've just given up." Ethan didn't respond to that. He stood up, moved to the sink, started washing his hands. "I'm not here to ask you to show me whatever you're building," she said. "I'm here because I want to know why you said no. Not to my father. I get that. I've watched people say no to my father about 12 times in my life, and it's always for one of 2 reasons. Either they don't think the thing works, or they don't want to deal with the liability." She paused. "Which one is it?" Ethan dried his hands, turned to face her. "Neither." "Then why?" He looked at her the way he looked at an engine he was about to diagnose. Not at the surface, not at the obvious, but at what was underneath. Direct, unhurried, with the kind of attention that most people had given up on allocating to anything anymore. "Because your father walks in here," he said, "puts money on a table, and treats you like a problem to be solved. And the last thing you need is one more person doing that." The garage was very quiet. Ava stared at him. And for the first time since she'd come through the door, either time, something shifted in her face. Just a fraction. Just a hairline crack in the evacuation.
"You don't know anything about what I need," she said.
"No," he agreed. "I don't." Another silence.
"My name's Ava," she said.
"I know. I'm Ethan."
"I know."
A pause.
"Your coffee is terrible, by the way. I can smell it from here."
He almost smiled. Not quite. "It's mechanic coffee. It's supposed to be terrible. That's how you know it's working." She looked at the workbench, the half-assembled carburetor, the row of tools, the coffee maker, old and scarred, that had probably made 10,000 cups over the years.
"Can I sit in here?" she said. "Just for a while. I don't want anything, I just—"
She stopped, and for a moment the practiced distance slipped entirely, and underneath it she was just tired. Just deeply, fundamentally tired.
"I'm sick of sitting in places where everyone is watching me to see if I'm okay."
Ethan pulled a stool away from the wall and set it near the work area. Not too close, not pointed at her, just there. Available. "I've got a cooling system to flush," he said. "You're welcome to stay." She stayed for 2 hours. He worked. She watched, sometimes. Sometimes she looked at her phone. Sometimes she just sat with her eyes closed, and the tightness in her shoulders, the coiled spring readiness that had been in her since the moment she arrived. It loosened, degree by degree, without either of them saying a word about it. Before she left, she stopped at the door. "You didn't ask me how it happened," she said. "No." "Everyone asks. First or second conversation, always." "That's their business," Ethan said, "not mine." She looked at him for a moment. Then she nodded once, not like thanks exactly, more like recognition. And she left. She came back the next Tuesday, and the Tuesday after that. And slowly, without either of them naming what was happening, the garage became a place she came when the weight of everything else got too heavy to carry in the usual locations. She didn't always talk. Sometimes she did, about small things first. The traffic on the drive over. Something Gracie had apparently told her once through the window of the upstairs apartment. Gracie had a habit of leaning out and delivering opinions to strangers, and Ava had become one of her favorites. Sometimes Ava talked about heavier things. She told him, one afternoon, about the accident. A black ice intersection in January, 3 years ago. A delivery truck that ran the light. She'd been a physical therapist herself. That was the part that people always found hardest to sit with, and she'd gotten used to watching their faces work around it. She'd spent years helping other people recover from exactly the kind of injury she sustained. She knew the anatomy. She knew the prognosis. She knew every study and every statistical outcome. She knew all of it, and it hadn't helped a single bit. "The worst part," she said, "isn't not walking. I mean, it's not great." A pause, almost dry. Almost a joke. "The worst part is the way it makes people look at you. Like you stopped being a full person and became a condition." She looked at her hands. "My father loves me, I know that. But every time he walks into a room, I feel like he's walking in to assess the situation, not to see me." She stopped. "You don't look at me like that." Ethan set down the socket wrench he was holding. "How do I look at you?" She thought about it. "Like I'm just
here, like it's not a big deal either way.
It's not, he said.
For most people, it is.
Most people make a lot of things into a bigger deal than they need to be. He went back to the bolt he was working. The chair is part of your life. Doesn't mean it's the whole thing. She was quiet for a while.
Ethan.
Yeah?
What's in the back room?
He didn't answer right away. He finished the bolt, set the wrench down again, leaned against the truck. Something I've been working on, he said.
How long?
6 years. She waited. It's not ready, he said.
I'm not asking to use it, she said. I just want to know what it is.
Another silence, longer. His fingers were doing that thing again, working against each other, turning something invisible over and over. It's a mobility frame, he said finally. External, wearable, designed to read residual neuromuscular signal and translate it into assisted movement. He stopped, said the rest of it like he was stating a mechanical fact. Designed to help people stand, maybe walk. The air in the garage changed. Ava's face went through several things in quick succession. Surprise, and then a careful, almost clinical analysis, and then something that she immediately pressed down and sealed.
You built that, she said. In here.
Been building it.
Alone.
Yeah.
Why haven't you taken it to?
Because it's not ready. His voice was still level, but there was something underneath it now. And because every time I get close to thinking it might be, I find 3 more things that could kill someone if they went wrong, and I start over. He looked at her directly. I'm a mechanic, not an engineer, not a doctor. I'm a man who knows how machines work, and I've spent 6 years learning everything else I needed to know. And I still don't know if it's enough. She looked at him for a long time.
Let me see it, she said.
Ava, I was a physical therapist for 6 years. I know what assistive mobility devices look like. I know what they're missing, and I know why they fail. Her voice was steady. Let me see it. The garage was silent, except for the hum of the fluorescent lights and the distant sound of a truck out on the road. Ethan looked at her, and then he stood up and walked to the door marked private. He pushed it open, and for the first time, he let someone else into the room. She didn't say anything for a full minute. She moved through the room slowly, past the drawings on the walls, past the whiteboard covered in calculations, past the stacks of notebooks and the shelves of fabricated components, and stopped at the work table. She looked at the frame for a long time. Then she looked at Ethan. Tell me how it works, she said. So he did. He told her about the sensor array, the surface electromyography patches that would read residual muscle activity in the user's legs. He told her about the control algorithm he'd been refining for 2 years, the way it processed the signal, interpreted intent, and triggered the actuators in sequence to produce a movement pattern that mirrored natural gait as closely as his understanding of biomechanics allowed. He told her about the balance compensation system, the accelerometers and gyroscopes, and the feedback loop that kept the frame from overcorrecting. He told her about the failures, the 3rd prototype that buckled under load, the 5th version that worked, but caused pressure sores within an hour of wear, the 7th iteration, where he got the gait cycle almost right, before the control unit failed under heat. He talked for almost 40 minutes. She listened the way a doctor listens, with complete attention, asking precise questions at precise moments, occasionally asking him to back up and explain a calculation. She looked at the notebooks. She looked at the frame from multiple angles. She asked him about the attachment system, about the load distribution, about how the device handled asymmetrical muscle function. When he finally stopped talking, She sat back. "You're not wrong," she said, "about the mechanics." Her voice was careful now, slow, like someone walking out onto ice and testing every step. There are gaps. The attachment system, the lateral pelvic support specifically, that's going to cause problems under dynamic load. And the EMG calibration process you're describing is going to need to be longer and more individualized than what you've got here. She paused. But the core of it, she stopped again. "What?" Ethan said. She looked at the frame. Her jaw was tight. Her hands were very still in her lap. So still that it was its own kind of tension. "The core of it," she said finally, "is better than half the clinical devices I've worked with." She looked up at him. "Where did you study biomechanics? Online courses? Textbooks? Some correspondence with a professor at Ohio State who didn't know I was a mechanic? You taught yourself all of this." "I had time, and I had a reason." She looked at him. "My sister," he said. Just those two words, and she understood, because she was exactly the kind of person who understood what lived in those two words without needing them unpacked. They stayed in the back room for another hour, and when she left that evening, she paused in the door the same way she always did. "Ethan?" "Yeah?" She looked out at the darkening lot. A long pause. "I want to try it," she said. Quiet, almost below hearing. "When it's ready. I want to try it." He didn't answer immediately, because this was the moment he'd been building toward for 6 years, and now that it was here, in the form of one person saying 4 words in a doorway, it was terrifying in a way that no calculation had prepared him for. "We're going to need to work through a lot of issues first," he said. "Weeks, maybe months. And I'm not making promises. I won't make promises." "I know." "I've been wrong before." "I know that too." "Ava," his voice was serious, "if this doesn't work—" "If it doesn't work," she said, turning to look at him squarely, "I'll be exactly where I am now, which I've already survived." A pause. "What I can't survive is spending the rest of my life wondering what would have happened if I just tried." The lot was still. A single streetlight buzzed on at the edge of the property. Ethan nodded once. "Come back Saturday," he said. "We'll start the assessment." She nodded, turned to go. "Ava." She stopped. "I'm not promising it works," he said again, "but I'm promising I won't give up on it." She looked at him for one long moment. And something in her face, that sealed door, that carefully maintained emptiness, opened, just slightly, just a crack, just enough for something to come through. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. That night, upstairs, Gracie asked her dad why he looked like he was thinking so hard. Ethan looked down at his 8-year-old daughter and said, "I made a promise today." "What kind of promise?" He thought about it. "The kind you have to keep." Gracie considered this with the deep seriousness of an 8-year-old who had decided opinions were important. "Then you better keep it, Daddy." He pulled her close. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I better." Outside, the garage was dark and locked. But in the back room, the frame sat on the work table under the work light Ethan had left burning, waiting, the way all unfinished things wait. For the hands willing to keep working. For the moment when almost ready finally becomes enough. Saturday came the way Saturdays in October always did in Millhaven. Gray sky, cold light, the smell of leaf decay drifting in from the tree line behind the lot. Ethan had been in the garage since 6 in the morning. not working on anything, just sitting in the back room with a cup of the terrible coffee, looking at the frame, running through everything that could go wrong. It was a long list. He'd written most of it down in a notebook the night before, after Gracie went to sleep. Structural failure points, calibration errors, load miscalculations, the attachment system. Ava had been right about the lateral pelvic support, and he'd been up until midnight reworking the bracket geometry. He wasn't sure it was fixed. He wasn't sure enough things were fixed. He wasn't sure this was ready. And the difference between not ready and almost ready, when the stakes were a person's body, felt enormous and uncrossable, and somehow he'd told her to come on Saturday anyway. He heard the tires on the gravel at 9:15. He didn't go to the door. He waited. He heard the ramp lower from the ride-share vehicle, heard the familiar electric hum of her chair, heard the gravel give way to the concrete apron at the garage entrance. Then she was in the bay doorway, and she said, "You look like you haven't slept." "I slept." "How much?" "Enough." She looked at him the way she'd looked at patients, he imagined, with the kind of professional skepticism that has given up on being polite about it. "That means not enough." "I was reworking the pelvic support," he said. "You were right about the lateral load issue." She rolled forward into the garage. She was wearing the same gray hoodie from the first day, sleeves down. She looked around the bay once, then looked back at him. "Can I see what you changed?" He led her to the back room. She spent 10 minutes examining the modified bracket, asking him about the load angles, the material choice, the attachment points. She didn't touch the frame, but she leaned close, and her eyes moved across it, the way they'd moved across all those drawings on the walls. Precisely. Missing nothing. "Better," she said finally. "Not perfect." "I know." "The transfer point here," she indicated without touching, a spot just above the hip joint. "Under dynamic load, if the user's center of gravity shifts left and the frame compensates right, you're going to get a shear force on this bracket that your current fastener torque spec won't hold." Ethan looked at the point she was describing. He looked at it for a moment and then said something he hadn't said to anyone in 6 years of working on this thing. "Show me what you mean." She did. She walked him through the force diagram with a pen on a piece of paper from his workbench. Clean, quick lines, the biomechanics recalled from years of clinical work with the same ease that Ethan recalled torque specs. She was precise. She was fast. And halfway through the explanation, Ethan noticed that she'd stopped looking at him for reactions and was just talking, just working through the problem, her voice losing that careful, measured quality and becoming something more direct, more alive. He didn't comment on it. He just worked. They spent the whole morning in the back room. Not with the frame, not yet, but with the drawings and the notebooks and 2 more cups of terrible coffee and a pad of paper that filled up with modifications and questions and cross-referenced calculations. Ava would identify a problem. Ethan would work through the mechanical solution. She would push back on the solution with a clinical consideration. He would adjust. Back and forth for 4 hours until the morning was gone and neither of them had noticed. At one point, Marcus knocked on the private door, something he'd never done before, and said there was a customer asking about brake work on a Silverado. Ethan said, "Tell them Monday." A pause on the other side of the door. "Yes, sir." Ava looked at him. "You just turned away work." "Monday's fine for brake work," he said, going back to the notebook. "This isn't." She was quiet for a moment. "Ethan, you don't have to." "I know I don't have to," he said. "Stop making it into something." She stopped making it into something. At noon, Gracie appeared. This was not unusual. On Saturdays, Gracie had a loose arrangement with the universe that involved migrating downstairs at some point in the morning and inserting herself into whatever was happening with the calm authority of someone who owned the building. She knocked once on the back room door. Her knock, a specific double tap that Ethan recognized, and he opened it. Gracie looked at her father. Then she looked at Ava. Then she looked at the frame on the table. "Is that the machine?" she said. Ethan said, "Gracie."
"I've seen it through the door before," Gracie said, unrepentant, in the manner of 8-year-olds who have been caught doing something that wasn't technically forbidden. "When the door was open a little. I didn't come in." "You've known this whole time?" Ethan said. "I didn't know what it was. I just knew it was important." She looked at Ava again, with the direct, non-self-conscious curiosity of a child who hadn't yet learned that staring was rude. "Are you the lady from the fancy car?" "She is," Ava said. "Your dad was really mean to your other dad," Gracie said. Ava's expression flickered. "He was trying to help. In his way." "My dad helps in his own way too," Gracie said, with the philosophical equanimity of someone who had made peace with this a long time ago. "You want a sandwich? I made them. They have mustard." Ethan looked at his daughter. "You made sandwiches?" "I made them myself. Marcus helped a little."
"How little?" "He did the knife parts." They ate sandwiches in the back room. Ethan at the stool, Ava by the work table, Gracie perched on the stack of parts boxes she'd dragged from the shelf. The conversation wandered. Gracie told Ava about her school project on the solar system, which she had strong opinions about, specifically regarding the reclassification of Pluto, which she considered a personal injustice. Ava listened with complete attention and validated every one of Gracie's positions on the matter with the gravity they deserved. And Ethan watched the two of them and felt something loosen in his chest that he hadn't known was tight. When Gracie went back upstairs, the room was quiet for a moment. "She's wonderful," Ava said. "She has opinions about everything." "So did I, at 8. A pause. "It gets it knocked out of you, a little. Eventually." Ethan looked at her. "Not all of it." She looked back at him. That small, involuntary something moved across her face again. The thing she was always pressing back down. "No," she said quietly. "Not all of it." That afternoon, they started the assessment. Not in the frame. That was weeks away at minimum. What Ethan needed first was data. Ava's specific neuromuscular profile. The degree and pattern of residual signaling in her lower extremities. The range and quality of any voluntary movement that remained. He explained this to her methodically, and she asked the right questions, and then she sat with the surface EMG sensors adhered to her legs, and they ran readings for 2 hours. It was the most clinical, technical afternoon either of them had spent together. And somehow, it was also the most important one. Because about 40 minutes in, something happened that neither of them expected. Ethan was watching the readout from the sensor array. A laptop screen, old, running software he'd adapted from an open-source C-Clinical tool. And he saw a signal. Faint, irregular, but unmistakable. He straightened up, looked at Ava. "Did you just try to move your left foot?" She looked at him. "What?" "Just now. You thought about it?" She was quiet for a second. Yes, I do that sometimes. Habit. I know nothing happens." Something happened. He turned the laptop screen toward her. "Right there. See that spike?" She looked at the readout. Her face went very still. "That's noise," she said. Her voice was careful, deliberately unexcited. "That could be artifact from—" "I've been running these sensors for 4 years, Ava. I know what artifact looks like." He paused, didn't oversell it, didn't let himself. "Try again. Same thing, just think about moving it. She looked at the screen. She was quiet. Still. The spike came back.
Slightly different shape, slightly different amplitude, but present. Clear. Neither of them said anything for a long moment. "It doesn't mean," she started. "I know what it doesn't mean," he said. "I'm not saying it means you're going to walk tomorrow. I'm saying there's signal there. Residual activity. Which means..." He stopped, measured what he was about to say. "Which means the machine has something to work with." She looked at the readout for a long time. The spike was still there on the screen, a little mountain range of data, proof of something her body had been doing quietly for 3 years that nobody had been looking for in this particular way. Her jaw was working. She pressed her lips together. She looked away from the screen. "Don't," she said. "Don't what?" "Don't get that look." Her voice was tight, not angry, controlled. The way a person sounds when they are applying enormous pressure to something that is trying to break open. "I've had that look aimed at me by every specialist and every well-meaning person for 3 years. And every time it just... Don't. Don't make this into hope yet. Let it just be data." Ethan closed the laptop. "Okay," he said. "It's just data." A pause. "Thank you," she said, quietly. He nodded, went back to the notes, gave her a minute. She gave herself exactly 1 minute. Then she pulled herself back together. He could see it happen. The composure reassembled piece by piece, with the practiced efficiency of long experience, and said, "What do you need for the next session?" "More of the same. I want readings across a full week if possible. Different times of day, different fatigue states. The more complete the profile, the better the calibration." "I can come Tuesday and Thursday." "That works." She looked at the closed laptop. "Ethan." "Yeah." "The signal." Her voice was very steady. "It was real, right? You're not..." "It was real," he said, no hesitation. She nodded, once, said nothing. But something had changed in the room, in the air between them, in whatever this thing was that they were building together in this back room that smelled like motor oil and old coffee and 6 years of stubborn, private hope. The sealed door in her was still sealed. She hadn't opened it. She wasn't ready to open it. But she'd put her hand on the handle. And that was something. The weeks that followed developed their own rhythm. Tuesdays and Thursdays, Ava came to the garage. Sometimes Saturday mornings, too, when she could get away without her father asking too many questions about where she was spending her time. The sessions were long and technical and exhausting in the way that productive things are exhausting. The kind of tired you feel at the end of the day when you've actually moved something forward instead of just moved. Ethan worked on the frame every night after Gracie went to sleep. He was doing things now that he hadn't been able to do before, because now he had a specific user, a specific neuromuscular profile, a specific set of parameters to optimize against. The machine was no longer theoretical. It was no longer built for anyone. It was being built for Ava. Her residual signal patterns were saved in the calibration files. Her joint measurements were in the attachment specifications. Her center of gravity, her muscle asymmetry, her specific gait compensation patterns from years of wheelchair use. All of it was in the notebook, and the frame was changing to meet it. Ray noticed that Ethan was staying up later. He didn't ask directly, because that wasn't Ray's way. But one morning he came in early and found Ethan asleep on the stool in the back room, head on the work table. and he quietly put a fresh cup of the terrible coffee beside him and went back out without saying a word, which was as close as Ray came to a declaration of unconditional support. And Ava, in the third week, started talking. Not about the frame, not about the assessment, but about other things, real things. The way the garage felt different from anywhere else. She said it like a confession, like she'd been holding it back. She told him about the first month after the accident, when she'd been in acute rehab and the silence of her own body below the waist had been so loud it drowned everything else out. She told him about the day she'd first managed to sit up on her own in the chair, and how everyone in the room had cheered and she'd felt nothing. Because she was a physical therapist, and she knew exactly what sitting up unassisted meant in the context of her injury. Which was that it was the first step of a very long road, and nobody was telling her what was at the other end of it. They kept saying progress, she said one Thursday evening, when the garage was dark outside the bay, and they'd been talking longer than either of them had planned. Every tiny incremental thing was progress, and I understood why they were doing it. Positive reinforcement, motivational framing, all the clinical reasons. But I was a PT. I knew the script. And knowing the script when you're the one in the chair. She stopped. It felt like being lied to, very kindly, which is almost worse than just being lied to. What would have helped? Ethan said. She thought about it. Actually thought about it, which he'd come to recognize. The silence she took when she was giving a question its full due, instead of the quick, practiced answer. Someone who didn't need me to be okay, she said. Who could just sit with the fact that it wasn't okay, and not need to fix that feeling, or reframe it, or move me toward the next milestone. A pause. Someone who could look at the situation honestly, and not flinch. He said nothing. She looked at him. You do that, you know. Do what? Don't flinch. She said it simply, not as a compliment, more as an observation about a thing she'd been trying to understand for weeks. Most people flinch. Doctors, family, friends. They look at me and something in their face does this adjustment, where they recalibrate how they're talking to me, how much truth to let through, how upbeat to be. You don't do that. You look at me the same way you look at everything else in this garage, like I'm just present, like the situation is what it is, and that's actually fine. Ethan was quiet for a moment. My sister hated the flinch, he said. She used to say it made her feel like a reminder of something. Like people saw her and immediately thought of everything they'd been told to be grateful for. And she became a symbol of something instead of just a person. Ava was very still. Lena, she said softly. He told her the name, the broad outline, not much more. Yeah, his voice was even. Calm the way something is calm, because it's carried that weight long enough that the carrying has become just part of the body. She was the one who never needed the flinch worked out. She'd just look at you and wait for you to get over yourself. And eventually, you did. Nobody was better at that than she was. She sounds like someone I would have liked, Ava said. She would have liked you, Ethan said. She had zero patience for people who accepted other people's versions of what they were capable of. And she would have had a lot to say about the way your father handles things. Ava made a sound that was almost a laugh. Almost. What would she have said? Something unforgettable and probably unprintable, Ethan said. And Ava did laugh then. Small, brief, but real. A real laugh. The kind that surprises the person doing it. In 5 weeks of knowing each other, it was the first time he'd heard it. He didn't make a thing of it. He went back to his notebook. But the sounds stayed in the room a little after she left.
The way the heat of an engine stays in the metal long after the ignition's off. A warmth you can still feel when you lay your hand down. Proof that something was running here. Something real and alive, not long before. In the 5th week, Ethan finished the recalibration of the attachment system. He ran the final structural tests on the modified bracket. Load cycling, dynamic shear, torsional flex, and it held. He ran them again because holding once wasn't the same as reliably holding, and it held again. And on the 3rd round, he sat back and looked at the frame and said, out loud in the empty back room, to no one, "Okay, Lena, this is it." He texted Ava that evening. Simple, no preamble. "I think we're ready to try the fit assessment. This week if you can." The reply came back in under a minute. Thursday. And then, after a brief pause, a second message. "I'm not ready. I'm coming anyway." He looked at those 2 sentences for a moment, set the phone down, picked it up again. "That's enough," he wrote back. He wasn't sure if he was telling her or himself. Maybe both. Maybe that was the only way any of this had ever moved forward. One person deciding that not ready but coming was sufficient. That showing up to the thing you were afraid of, even half-assembled, even uncertain, was the thing that separated the fixed from the still broken. Thursday morning, he was up before 5. He went downstairs, started the coffee, sat in the back room, and looked at the frame. Finished now, or as finished as 6 years of work could make it, which was never all the way, but far enough. Far enough to try. Far enough to maybe be the thing he'd been building it to be. Gracie came downstairs at 7 and found him still sitting there. She looked at him, at the frame, at him again. "Today's the day, isn't it?" she said. Ethan looked at his daughter, 8 years old, standing in the doorway in her pajamas, with her hair going in 4 directions and her face completely serious. "Yeah," he said. "Today's the day." Gracie nodded slowly, with the weight of someone who understood, on some level below words, what was at stake. "I'll make the coffee," she said. "Gracie." "What?" "You can't use the stove by yourself." "I'll use the Keurig." "We don't have a Keurig." "We should get one," she said, and disappeared back upstairs. Ethan sat alone in the back room and waited for 9 o'clock. Outside, the morning moved in the way October mornings in Ohio do. Steady, unhurried, the light coming gray and honest through the single window above the work table, falling across the frame on the table like it had somewhere to be and didn't mind the wait. Ava arrived at 9:03. Ethan knew the exact time because he'd been watching the clock in the back room since 8:45 and had told himself to stop watching it, and had not stopped watching it. When he heard the gravel, he stood up, looked at the frame one more time, and walked out into the bay. She came through the door, and she looked at him, and neither of them said good morning. The pleasantries had dropped somewhere around week 3, which was when they'd both stopped performing the normal social scaffolding and started just getting to work. It was the kind of shorthand that takes years to develop with some people and arrives almost immediately with others. And neither of them had commented on it, because commenting on it would have required acknowledging it, and they were both, in their own ways, cautious about acknowledging things. "How'd you sleep?" he said. "I didn't." She moved past him toward the back room. "How were the structural tests?" "Held through 12 cycles. Dynamic and static both." 12. I ran more overnight. 22 total. No failure. She stopped at the door of the back room and looked at the frame and was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Okay." in the way that meant she'd been going through this conversation in her head all night and was now trying to match the actual moment to the one she'd rehearsed. And the actual moment was refusing to cooperate. "We don't have to do the fit assessment today," Ethan said. She looked at him. "We're doing it today." "I'm just saying, Ethan." Her voice was very controlled. "If you give me an out right now, I will take it. So please don't give me one." He closed his mouth, nodded once. "Okay." The fit assessment was not the same as using the device.
That was what he'd explained to her twice, and what she understood clinically, and what her body apparently had not communicated to her nervous system. Because from the moment she transferred from the chair to the padded assessment bench he'd built against the wall, a process she handled with the efficient, practiced transfer technique of someone who'd been doing it for years, her hands were shaking. She saw him see it. "Don't," she said. "I wasn't going to say anything." "You had a look." "I don't have a look." "You have a specific look that means you're about to be careful with me. And I need you to not be careful with me right now. Treat this like a mechanical problem. That's what I need." He picked up the measurement tool. "Left hip first. Hold still." She held still. He worked methodically. Hip measurements, joint angles, limb length ratios, the specific geometry of her lower body that the attachment system needed to conform to. He'd done this on paper from the assessment data they'd collected over weeks. But this was the real thing. Direct contact, actual fitting, the machine meeting the person it had been built for. He talked while he worked, narrating each step, not because she needed him to, but because the sound of a clear, technical voice seemed to help them both stay in the mechanical frame of mind rather than the other one. "Lateral pelvic bracket is sitting right," he said. "Tell me if you feel any pressure points." "Nothing yet." "Knee joint. I'm going to flex it through range. Tell me when it starts to resist." "There." A pause. "And there." "Okay. That's the natural end of range, or..." "Natural end. It's not the device." "Good." He marked the notebook. "Hip flexor attachment, coming down now. Same thing, pressure points, anything that feels wrong." They worked for an hour and 40 minutes. He adjusted. She reported. He adjusted again. The frame was not on her, not the full assembly, not the active system, just the attachment chassis, the parts that would interface between her body and the machine. And even that was significant. Even that was a thing she had never worn. A thing that no version of her life since the accident had included. At one point she went quiet for longer than usual, and he looked up from the adjustment he was making, and she was staring at the wall. Not at anything on the wall. Through it. "Talk to me," he said. "I'm fine." "You went somewhere else. Come back." She looked at him. Her jaw was tight. "I was just thinking about... before. When I used to fit patients for orthotic devices. I would talk them through exactly this process. I knew exactly what to say." A pause. "I knew all the things that were going through their heads, and I had this whole professional script for it. Patient education, expectation management." She stopped. "I hate that I need that script right now." "You don't need the script," Ethan said. "Then what do I need?" He considered, set down the measurement tool. "Tell me what's actually going through your head right now. Not the PT version, the real version." She looked at the ceiling for a moment. He waited. "I'm afraid," she said. The words came out flat, stripped of everything. "I'm afraid it's going to work a little, just enough to feel like something. And then it's going to stop, and it's going to be worse than if it had never worked at all, because I'll have something to compare the not working to." She looked at him.
I'm afraid of the specific kind of hope that comes just before the specific kind of devastation. And I've been there before. More than once. And She stopped. You don't want to go back there, he said. I can't go back there. Her voice broke on the last word. Just slightly. Just at the edge. And she pressed her lips together and held it. I can't. I've rebuilt myself around not going there. And this, she looked at the frame, this is the door to that place. The room was quiet. Ethan sat down on the stool across from her. Not close, not at a therapeutic distance, just across from her, at the same level, the way you sit with someone when you're going to say something that matters. I'm going to tell you something about this machine, he said. She waited. I've started it over 7 times, he said. 7 full versions. Some of them I scrapped after weeks. One of them I scrapped after 14 months because I found a load distribution flaw that would have fractured someone's pelvis under the wrong conditions. He paused. Every time I started over, I had the same conversation with myself that you're having right now, about whether hope was worth the cost of it going wrong again. What did you decide? Every time I decided to start over. He said it plainly. Not because I was sure it would work, but because I was sure that Lena would have thought it was worth trying. And that turned out to be enough to keep going. He looked at the frame. It's not a perfect machine, Ava. I'll never tell you it is. But it's the best I know how to build. And the question isn't whether it's perfect. The question is whether the person in it is willing to be in an imperfect machine and see what it can do. She didn't answer immediately. I spent 6 years on this, he said. Every night after Gracie went to sleep. Every weekend. Every hour I could find. Not because I was sure, but because not trying wasn't something I could live with. She looked at him for a long time. Why? She said. Why couldn't you live with not trying? He was quiet for a moment. Because of the way Lena looked at the end, he said. Not sad, not angry, just... He stopped, found the word. Unlived. Like there were things she'd wanted to do that nobody had ever figured out how to help her do. And by the time she was gone, those things were gone with her. His voice was steady, but underneath it there was something old and settled and heavy. I can't fix that. I can't change what happened. But if I can build something that means somebody else doesn't go out that way, somebody who still has years ahead of them and just needs the right machine. He stopped. Then that's what I'm going to do. Ava was very still. I'm not your sister, she said softly. No, he said. You're not. You're someone completely different who gets to have a completely different ending. The silence after that was different from the silences before it. Fuller. Like something had been said that was going to take a while to settle, but had definitely, finally, been said. After a moment, Ava reached up and touched the edge of the attachment chassis. Just her fingertips, just briefly, and said, Finish the assessment. He picked up the measurement tool. They worked for another 40 minutes. By the end of it, every bracket was logged, every dimension confirmed, every contact point mapped. He had everything he needed for the final calibration of the control system. 1 week, he said, making the last notation. Maybe 10 days. Then we contrive a full fit with the active system. She nodded. She didn't say anything for a moment, and then she said, Walk me through what that looks like. The first active session. He did. He explained the process, the EMG patches first, the calibration run with a system passive, then active engagement at low power, incrementally increased. He explained the support structure he was going to rig in the bay. 2 parallel bars, the same setup used in physical rehabilitation for early ambulation, which he was going to fabricate from steel pipe and weld to a floor plate so they wouldn't move under any load. He explained that for the first session, standing upright was the only goal. Not movement, not steps, just standing. "And what do I do?" she said. "You do what you were doing in the EMG sessions. You think about moving. You let your body try. The machine reads the signal and assists the effort. And if the signal isn't strong enough, then we adjust the sensitivity threshold and try again. And if it is strong enough and I still don't, then we find out why and we adjust for that too." She looked at her hands in her lap. "You have an answer for everything." "I have a plan for everything," he said. "Those aren't the same thing." She almost smiled again. It was closer than the week before. When she transferred back to the chair and was ready to leave, Gracie appeared in the doorway of the back room. As she did, as she apparently always would, with the timing of someone who had some internal antenna for significant moments. "Are you coming back Thursday?" Gracie said to Ava. "Yes," Ava said. "Are you going to try the machine next time?" "Gracie," Ethan said. "It's okay," Ava said. She looked at Gracie. "Not next time, but soon." Gracie absorbed this. "Are you scared?" The question sat in the air with the absolute guilelessness that only children achieve. No agenda, no strategy, just the thing itself, asked directly, the way adults spend years learning not to ask. Ava looked at the 8-year-old for a moment. Then she said, "Yes, a lot." Gracie nodded. "My dad gets scared too. He just doesn't tell people." Ethan said, "Gracie." "It's true," she said, unperturbed. "I hear him sometimes at night when he's working in here, and he talks to the machine." She looked at Ava with complete seriousness. "He says, 'Okay, let's try again.' A lot. Like, really, a lot." Ava looked at Ethan. He was looking at his daughter with the expression of a man whose interior life had just been accurately reported to a relative stranger by someone he loved and trusted, which was a specific kind of exposure that had no good response. "That's called problem solving," he said. "I know," Gracie said. "That's what I said. You're not scared, you're problem solving." She looked at Ava. "You'll be okay. My dad is really good at fixing things." Ava held the 8-year-old's gaze for a moment. Something moved through her face. Not the small hairline crack of before, but something more open, more ungoverned. She blinked it back. "I think so too," she said. Her voice was very even. She left 10 minutes later. Ethan stood in the bay door and watched the car until it turned out of the lot and was gone. Then Ray appeared from behind the Silverado he'd been steadily working on all morning in the main bay. Brake job, rescheduled from the week before, and said, without looking up from the rotor he was holding, "She's getting better." Ethan turned. "Who?" "The woman in the chair. She walks in here different than she did the first time." "She doesn't walk in." "You know what I mean." Ray set the rotor down. "First time I saw her, she had all the lights off, like she was just enduring being here. Now, she's actually here." He finally looked at Ethan. "That's you, man. You did that." "She did that," Ethan said. "She had a reason to," Ray said. "That's you." Ethan didn't answer that. He went back into the back room and sat down and opened the calibration file on the laptop, and started the final round of parameter adjustments for the control system. Outside, he could hear Ray working, the familiar rhythm of socket and impact driver, and the occasional commentary Ray directed at whichever vehicle had the audacity to be difficult. And the afternoon moved forward the way it always did. Workday normal. The garage being a garage. But the frame on the table was not the same frame it had been this morning. It had been measured against a real person now. The dimensions in the CAD file were no longer abstract. They were hers. And the calibration parameters he was setting now were built from 6 weeks of her specific neuromuscular signature, her particular body, the specific and individual way her nervous system spoke in its quiet, residual voice that most people had decided wasn't worth listening to. He worked until 7.
Then he went upstairs, made dinner, pasta, the kind Gracie would actually eat, which excluded a range of ingredients she had strong positions on, and sat at the table with his daughter and listened to her tell him about the Pluto project, which had expanded in scope to include a strongly worded letter to the International Astronomical Union that Gracie intended to submit through proper channels, which she had identified as the website. He helped her with a letter after dinner. It was very good, passionate, factually grounded. It made 3 clear arguments. "You should sign it," Gracie said. "It's your letter. You helped." "As a mechanic, I feel like my position on planetary classification might not carry a lot of weight." Gracie considered this. "You're very smart, though." "Thank you." "Ava thinks so, too." He looked at his daughter. "She say that?" "She didn't have to," Gracie said with the authority of 8. "I can tell." She went back to the letter. "She looks at you the same way I look at you." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "How's that?" "Like you're the person who knows how to fix the thing," Gracie said simply. He sat with that for a moment. The weight of it. Not the romantic reading, not the sentimental one, but the real one. The specific gravity of being the person someone has decided to believe in, when believing in something has cost them before, and might cost them again, and they've decided to do it anyway. "Finish the letter," he said. "You didn't answer." "Finish the letter, Gracie." She finished the letter. He proofread it. It was submitted to the IAU website at 8:45 p.m. with Gracie's full name and the return address of Cole's Auto and Machine Repair, Mill Haven, Ohio, in the sender field. She went to bed proud. He went back down to the garage. He worked on the calibration until midnight. Then he sat in the back room and looked at the frame and did the thing he always did at the end of a long day, which was go through everything that could still go wrong. The list was shorter than it used to be. Not short, but shorter. He had 10 days, maybe 7 if he pushed. He was going to push. Because Ava Bennett had sat in a room with a machine today and touched the edge of it and told him she was afraid, and that was the most honest thing she'd said since the day she'd wheeled, back through his door and told him she didn't want to be here. And both of those things took more courage than people understood. And the least he could do was make sure that when she came back and strapped into this thing and told her body to try, the machine answered. He picked up the calibration file. He got back to work. He finished the calibration in 8 days. Not 10, not 7. 8, which felt like the right number. Not rushed, not prolonged, just the amount of time the work actually required when you stopped second-guessing every parameter and started trusting what 6 years of building and 6 weeks of data had earned you the right to trust. He ran the final system check on a Wednesday evening, went through every subsystem twice, found one voltage irregularity in the left knee actuator circuit that took him 4 hours to trace to a connector that had developed a hairline crack, replaced it,
ran the check again, and at 11:47 p.m. he sat back and said, out loud to the empty room, "That's it." He texted Ava, "Saturday, 10 a.m. We're ready." The reply came back fast, which meant she'd been waiting for it, which meant she hadn't been sleeping either. "I'll be there." Then, after a pause, "Is the coffee going to be as bad as usual?" He looked at that for a moment. "Worse," he wrote back. "Special occasion." He didn't sleep much that night. Not from anxiety exactly. It was something else. Something that didn't have a clean name. The feeling of standing at the end of a very long road and being able to see, for the first time, that it does in fact end somewhere, and that somewhere is close enough to make out the shape of. He lay in the dark and listened to the building settle and thought about Lena, the way he did on the nights that mattered. And he said what he always said to her on those nights, which was quiet and private and not for anybody else. Then he got up at 5 and went downstairs and made the coffee. Ray showed up at 7:30, which was 45 minutes before his shift started, and didn't explain why. He just came in, poured himself a cup, looked at the closed door of the back room and said, "Today's the day?" "Today's the day," Ethan said. Ray nodded, picked up his coffee. "I'll stay out of the way." "I know you will, but I'm going to be right here." Ethan looked at him. Ray was looking at his coffee cup with the expression of a man who had said what he needed to say and was now pretending he hadn't said it. Ethan didn't respond to that, because neither of them needed him to. Gracie came down at 8, assessed the situation with the accuracy she always brought to significant mornings, and announced that she was going to Kayla's house for the day. Ethan looked at her. "I didn't arrange that." "I called Kayla's mom last night," she said. "She said it was fine. I figured you'd want the space." She picked up her backpack from the hook by the stairs. Then she stopped and turned back. "Tell Ava I said good luck." "I will." She looked at him for a moment, with those eyes that saw too much. "You're going to be great, Dad." He looked at his daughter. 8 years old, a person so fundamentally decent that sometimes it stopped him cold. This kid he'd raised above a garage with 2 bedrooms and motor oil in the air, who had taught herself more about how to be in the world than most adults he knew. "Get out of here," he said. She grinned and went. Ava arrived at 10:01. She came through the bay door, and Ethan was already in the back room, and she came to the doorway, and they looked at each other, and neither of them said anything for a moment. And then she looked at the frame and looked at him and said, "Show me what you changed." He showed her. He walked her through the final calibration parameters, the connector replacement, the adjusted sensitivity thresholds on the EMG input channels. She asked 4 questions. The questions were precise, and he answered them precisely. And when he was done, she sat for a moment and then said, "Okay." "The bars are rigged in the bay," he said. "I welded the floor plate Thursday. I checked the load ratings twice." "How wide is the stance?" "Shoulder width on you, based on the assessment data. Adjustable if we need to change it." "And the first session is just standing." "Just standing. No movement goals, no distance. Just upright, with the machine active, and whatever your body decides to do from there is what we work with." She looked at the frame. Her hands were in her lap, very still. "Walk me through the sequence again." He did. He'd done it 3 times over the past 2 weeks, once in person, twice by phone when she'd called in the evenings, and he'd known without her saying it that she needed to hear the process again. Needed to hold the sequence in her mind like a map of a route she was going to have to drive in the dark. He talked her through it again now, step by step, the same way every time. because consistency was its own kind of reassurance. She listened with her eyes closed. When he finished, she opened them.
"Okay," she said again. "Let's go."
The bay was quiet and clean. Ray had swept it that morning, which was not something Ray did voluntarily, and Ethan had noticed and not commented on it. The parallel bars ran north to south down the center of the open bay, 8 feet long, welded solid to a steel floor plate, exactly shoulder width for Ava. The frame hung on its mounting rack beside the bench, fully assembled, charged, every system green on the status panel. Ava transferred to the padded bench. No tremor in her hands this time. Or if there was, she'd decided not to let it show, which was its own kind of courage. Ethan attached the EMG patches first, same positions as the assessment sessions, and she held still and didn't speak while he worked. Then he brought the frame over. The process of fitting it was practiced now. They'd done the attachment chassis 3 times over the previous weeks, and her body knew the sequence. This bracket at the hip, this cuff at the thigh, this joint aligned at the knee, this connection at the ankle. It took 12 minutes. She told him 1 pressure point at the left knee cuff that he adjusted with a 1/4 turn of the fit screw. "Better," she said. He plugged in the harness connector. The status panel shifted from standby to ready. The system ran its self-check. 4 seconds of quiet humming as each actuator cycled through its range test. And then the green light held. He looked at her. "How do you feel?" She looked down at the device around her legs. Her expression was unreadable, in the way that something is unreadable when it is working very hard to contain something too large for a face to hold. "Heavy," she said. "And—" She stopped. "And?" "Real," she said. "It feels real, which is different from how I thought it would feel."
"How'd you think it would feel?"
"Clinical. Medical equipment." She touched the frame lightly with her fingertips. "It doesn't feel like that. It feels like something that was actually made." A pause. "Made for something." "It was," he said. She looked at him. He looked back. No flinch, same as always. Same as it had been since the first afternoon she'd stayed in the garage because she was tired of being watched. Just present. Just honest. Just 2 people about to try something that mattered. "Okay," she said. "What do I do?" "We get you to the bars first. I'm going to support your right side. You tell me if anything feels wrong. Pressure, resistance, anything that doesn't feel right. We stop immediately. No argument, no pushing through it. You say stop, we stop." "Understood." "And if the system gives you any kind of pain signal—" "I know what pain signals are," she said. "Former PT, remember?" "I remember." He positioned himself at her right side, arms steady at her back. "Ready?" She took a breath. "Ready." The transfer from the bench to standing position was assisted, him taking weight on the right, the frame supporting the structure on both sides, the process slow and intentional. And then she was at the bars, hands gripping the steel, and she was upright, and the frame was active, and for a moment, nothing happened except that Ava Bennett was standing. Just standing. For the first time in 3 years. She didn't say anything. Her knuckles were white on the bars. Her breathing was audible. Not distressed, but present. The breath of someone who is fully inside their body, in a way they haven't been for a long time. She was looking straight ahead at the far wall of the garage, and her jaw was set, and her eyes were wide and completely dry. Ethan stood at her right side and said nothing, and did not move. He gave her 60 seconds with it. Just that. Just the fact of vertical. "Tell me what you're feeling," he said. Quiet, clinical, not making it big. "Strange," she said. "Tall." A pause. "The world looks different from here. I forgot." Her voice was controlled but thin. "I forgot how much taller everything was." "The system's holding well," he said. "No alerts. Actuators are tracking at expected load." "I know." She was still looking straight ahead. "I can feel them. I can feel the machine." She stopped. "It's not like I expected." "Good different or bad different?" It's like," she searched for the words. "It's like someone put scaffolding around a building that's been leaning. You can feel the support. It's not your own strength, but it's not fighting you either. It's just there, underneath you." Ethan made a note on the tablet he was holding in his left hand. "Okay, when you're ready, not yet, just when you're ready, I want you to think about your left foot. Same thing we did in the EMG sessions. Just think about it. Don't force it. Let the intention come and let the machine read it." She was quiet. He waited. She said, "I'm thinking about it." He watched the readout on the control unit. The EMG display was live, the same graph he'd been watching for 6 weeks, the same faint signal profile he'd memorized. He watched it and waited, and the spike came. Strong. Stronger than the assessment sessions. Much stronger. The left knee actuator responded. A small, smooth extension, maybe 10 degrees. Hold. Return. The system had read the signal and acted on it, and the action had been exactly what the calibration predicted. Ava made a sound. Not a word, not a cry. A sound that came from somewhere below language. The specific sound of a body recognizing itself doing something it had been told it could no longer do. "Again," she said. Her voice was barely there. "Did that just—" "Yes," he said. "That was you. Your signal. The machine responded to you." "Again," she said, louder. "Same thing. Left foot. Whenever you're ready." She tried again. The spike came faster this time. The signal cleaner, stronger, like a muscle memory reasserting itself through a pathway that had been quiet but not dead. The actuator responded, smoother this time, the movement arc a little wider. "Again," she said. "Ava, let's not—" "Again, Ethan." He looked at her face. It was fierce and terrified and absolutely alive, in a way that he had seen building for weeks, and that was now fully present. Every light in the building on. He looked at the control unit. All systems green, load within parameters. No alerts. "Again," he said. The third time, she didn't just think about the foot. She tried to step. Not a full step. The system wasn't calibrated for full gait yet, and that wasn't the goal. That wasn't what they'd said. But her body tried. The residual signal fired through both legs in sequence. Left, right, left. The pattern of walking. The pattern her nervous system had stored somewhere deep and unforgotten through 3 years of stillness. And the frame read it, and it responded, and Ava Bennett's legs moved. Not far, not smoothly. The right side was weaker signal, and the actuator assist was asymmetrical, and she lurched forward slightly against the bars, and Ethan's arm was there immediately at her back, steady, and she caught herself on the bars and stopped. The garage was silent. She was breathing hard. Her arms were shaking on the bars. Her head was down. He didn't speak. He kept his arm at her back, and he waited. It took a moment. When she lifted her head, her face was wet, and her eyes were wide, and she looked at him with an expression that was so far beyond words that neither of them made any attempt at words for a very long time. Then she said, "I moved." "You moved," he said.
That was me. That was you. She looked down at the frame, at her legs, at the floor that was 4 inches closer than it had been from the wheelchair. She looked at her hands on the bars, and she looked at the distance between herself and the end of the parallel bars, and she said, very quietly, like a person saying something they have been afraid to think for a very long time, "I want to try to walk." He took a breath. "Not today," he said. "Today was standing. Today was movement. That's more than we planned." "I know it's more than we planned. Ava." His voice was firm and steady. "The system needs to be recalibrated based on what just happened. The right side signal is weaker than we thought, and I need to adjust the assist ratio before we try any sustained gait sequence. Otherwise, you're going to compensate in your upper body, and we'll be dealing with shoulder strain before we even get to walking." He paused. "I'm not telling you no, I'm telling you not today, because I want today to work, and it is working, and I am not going to let us blow it by going too fast." She was gripping the bars, looking at him, jaw set. Then she exhaled. The tension in her shoulders dropped 2 degrees. "How long to recalibrate?" "I can have the right side assist adjusted before you leave today. Next session, Tuesday, if you can do Tuesday, we start gait sequencing." "Tuesday," she said, immediately. "Tuesday," he said, 8 a.m. She stood at the bars for 40 more minutes, not trying to walk, just standing, letting the system track her, letting the calibration refine against the real-time data of her body's actual signal profile as it warmed up, as the nervous system woke up to the presence of the machine and started communicating with a clarity that the assessment sessions had only hinted at. He watched the readout, and she stood, and neither of them talked much, and the silence was full and clean and good. When they finally sat down, her back in the chair, him on the stool, both of them tired in the specific way of people who have been completely present for a sustained period of time, she said, "Tell me honestly, what did you see?" "The signal is stronger than the assessment data suggested," he said. "Both sides, but significantly more on the left. The right side is going to need a higher assist ratio, probably for several sessions, until the signal builds. The movement pattern your system produced—" He stopped, looking for the right words. "It was correct. The sequence was right. Your body knows how to walk. It's been knowing this whole time." She looked at him. "Your neuromuscular system never forgot," he said. "The injury disrupted the pathway. It didn't erase the memory." He paused. "That's what I've been trying to tell you for 6 weeks, and I didn't say it directly because I didn't want to set an expectation I couldn't back up. But now I've seen the data. I've seen what just happened." He looked at her steadily. "You're going to walk, Ava. Not because the machine can do it for you, because your body already knows how, and the machine is going to help it remember." She was quiet for a very long time. Outside, somewhere in the parking lot, a bird was making noise. The fluorescent light above the bench buzzed its low note. Normal sounds. Regular sounds. The garage being exactly what it always was. Imperfect, oil-stained, lit by institutional lighting. Not a hospital, or a clinic, or a facility with a name on a building. Just a garage, where something extraordinary had just happened. "I need to call my father," she said finally. Ethan looked at her. "Not to report," she said quickly. I'm not asking him to come in and take over. She stopped. "He needs to know that something is happening. She looked at her hands. "He's been carrying this longer than I have, in some ways, and it's been eating him alive.
And he doesn't know how to say that. And I've been too angry to give him space for it. A pause. Today feels like the day I stopped punishing him for caring the wrong way. Ethan said nothing. He just looked at her the way he always did. Straight on. No flinch. No commentary. Just room for whatever she was working through. "Does that make sense?" she said. "Yeah," he said. "It makes sense." She nodded, looked at the frame on its rack. "Ethan?" "Yeah." "Thank you." The two words came out plain and direct, and without any ornamentation, which was exactly right, because what they were carrying didn't need decoration. Not for today specifically. For all of it. For... She stopped. For not treating me like a problem. He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "You're not a problem." "I know," she said. "You're the first person in 3 years who made me actually know that, not just hear it." He stood up, went to the workbench, picked up the calibration tablet. "Come back Tuesday," he said. Because that was what he could give her that was better than any response to what she just said. The next step, the specific plan, the proof that this was continuing, that today was not a singular event, but a beginning. 8 a.m., she said. 8 a.m. She moved toward the bay door. At the threshold, she stopped, as she always did. "Gracie's going to want a full report," she said. "Gracie's going to demand a full report," he said, "and detailed testimony." Ava smiled. Not the almost smile from the first weeks. Not the small, brief, real laugh from that one evening. A full smile, tired and overwhelmed and lit from somewhere deep inside. The smile of a person who has just been handed back something they had stopped letting themselves miss. She went out into the afternoon. Ray appeared from behind the Chevy he'd been working on in the far bay. Pointedly, very pointedly, not looking toward the parallel bars or the back room, and said, to his ratchet, to no one, "Good session?" "Good session," Ethan said. Ray nodded, went back to work. Ethan stood in the empty bay and looked at the parallel bars, and looked at the floor, and thought about the 40 minutes Ava had stood at those bars, and the 3 times the machine had answered, and the way her face had looked the moment she understood what was happening. He thought about Lena. He thought, "I kept the promise." Then he picked up the calibration tablet, went back to the frame, and started adjusting the right side assist ratio for Tuesday. Tuesday came with the kind of cold that meant October was done pretending and November was already at the door. Ethan was in the garage at 6. He'd spent Sunday and Monday on the right side assist recalibration. Not because it required 2 full days, but because he ran it 12 times and then ran it again. And each time he found something small enough to argue himself out of, but significant enough to fix anyway. And at some point on Monday night, he understood that he wasn't running tests anymore. He was managing fear. And the most useful thing he could do was stop and go to bed. He went to bed. He was still up at 5. Ray came in at 7:30 again, same as Saturday, without explanation. Marcus came in at 8 and took one look at the parallel bars in the bay and the expression on Ethan's face, and found a very complicated engine problem to attend to at the far end of the garage, which was the most tactful thing Marcus had done in 2 years of employment. Ava arrived at 7:58, 2 minutes early, which told him everything about how her weekend had gone. She came through the bay door and she was already scanning the bars, the frame on the rack, the status panel, running her own assessment before she'd even come to a full stop. "You recalibrated the right side," she said. "Saturday night and all day Sunday," he said. "What's the new assist ratio?" He told her. She asked 3 questions. He answered them. They walked to the back room, and she looked at the control unit readout, and he walked her through the parameter changes, and she was quiet and focused in the way she always was when she was processing technical information. Completely inside it, no spare attention for anything else. Then she said, "How do you feel about today?" He looked at her. It was not the kind of question she usually asked. "Good," he said carefully. "Data from Saturday gives me a solid baseline. The recalibration addresses the asymmetry. I think—" He stopped, measuring it. "I think today we get steps." She held his gaze for a moment.
Real steps. Real steps, he said. She looked at the frame. Okay, she said, and then, my father called me Sunday. He waited. I called him Saturday after I left here, like I said I would. I told him something was happening, not details. I wasn't ready for details. Just that I'd been working with someone, and that there was real progress. She paused. He was quiet for a long time, and then he said— She stopped. Something moved across her face. He said, "Ava, I'm sorry. I've been so busy trying to fix things that I forgot to ask you what you actually needed." Her voice was very steady. 14 words. That's all it took. 14 words and 3 years of everything. Just— She pressed her lips together. I told him where I was, not to come, just so he knew. Ethan didn't say anything. He just gave it space, the way she'd once told him she needed. Someone who could sit with the fact of a thing without rushing to reframe it. He's coming Saturday, she said. I invited him. I want him to see whatever happens between now and then. She looked at Ethan directly. I want him to understand what this is, what you built, what it actually means. She paused. Is that okay? It's your call, he said. I'm asking if it's okay with you. He thought about Saturday 3 weeks ago. The billionaire walking into his garage, laying money on the table, the whole transaction of it. He thought about what that man's face had looked like in the unguarded second before he walked out. Just a father. Just scared. Yeah, he said. It's okay. She nodded. Let's go. The fit process was faster now. Her body had learned the sequence, muscle memory taking over from conscious attention. And the EMG patches went on clean, and the frame went on clean. And 12 minutes after she'd transferred to the bench, she was at the bars. She stood for 3 minutes first. Just stood, the way they'd done Saturday, giving the system time to track and the calibration time to confirm. Ethan watched the readout. The right side signal was already coming in stronger than Saturday, measurably stronger, which meant either the recalibration was working, or her nervous system was, on some level, beginning to respond to the presence of the machine with something like recognition. Right side feels different, she said. Signal stronger. You're getting more left-right symmetry than Saturday. I can feel it. She shifted her weight, testing. The support is more even. Tell me when you want to start the sequence. She was quiet for a moment. Her hands were loose on the bars now, not gripping, just resting, just there for balance. Her eyes were straight ahead. Now, she said. Left foot first, same as Saturday. Think about it. Let it come. Don't force. She stepped. Not a tentative signal. Not a twitch of intention. A step. Left foot forward, weight shift, right foot following. The gait sequence firing clean through both legs in the correct pattern. The frame reading and responding and assisting with a smoothness that was different from Saturday. Better than Saturday.
the recalibration doing exactly what he'd spent 2 days making it do. She took 3 steps before she stopped. 3 steps, the length of a kitchen, the width of a doorway. Nothing in the geography of the world. Everything in the geography of the last 3 years. She stopped with her hands back on the bars and her head down and her shoulders shaking. And this time Ethan did not wait. He said her name. Ava. Quiet and direct. And she lifted her head, and she was not crying. She was doing something harder than crying. Something that was on the other side of crying, with a feeling as too big even for that. "Say something," he said. "Tell me what you're feeling." She stopped. Tried again. "My legs feel..." Another stop. "They feel like mine," she said finally. "For the first time in 3 years, they feel like mine again." He looked at the readout. Every number was where he needed it. He looked at her face. He said, "Do it again." She did it again. 5 steps this time. Slow, deliberate. The kind of steps that cost everything and are worth everything. At the end of the bars, she stopped and turned. The frame handled the rotation. And she was facing back the way she'd come, and the length of the parallel bars was 8 feet, and she looked at that 8 feet like it was the entire known world. "Again," she said. "Ava." "Ethan, again." He looked at the system status. All green. Actuators within load range. Her breathing was elevated but controlled. Her signal was holding strong. "Again," he said. She walked the bars 3 more times. Not without effort. Each pass cost her. The concentration visible in her jaw, in the set of her shoulders, in the way she breathed through each step like it required the full allocation of everything she had. By the 3rd pass, her legs were trembling with fatigue, and the signal was beginning to soften at the edges. He told her to stop, and she didn't argue, which meant she'd been at the edge of her limit, and she knew it. And she was, above all things, too much of a professional to blow the work they'd done by going past it. She stood at the end of the bars, chest rising and falling, face completely open, all of it, all the things she'd spent 3 years sealing behind that careful, practiced blankness, just present on her face, where anyone who looked could see it. Ray was in the doorway of the main bay. He'd stopped pretending to work on the Chevy. He was just standing there with his arms crossed and his head down and not looking, and his shoulders were doing something that Ray would categorically deny and that Ethan was going to let him categorically deny, because Ray had earned it. "Good," Ethan said to Ava. "That's enough for today." "Tuesday wasn't supposed to be enough for today," she said. "Tuesday was supposed to be the beginning." "Tuesday is the beginning," he said, "which is exactly why we stop here. You don't blow out the engine on the first test drive." She looked at him. Something in her expression broke briefly into something that was almost a laugh, exasperated and overwhelmed and grateful all at once. And then she said, "That's the most mechanic thing anyone has ever said to me." "I'm a mechanic," he said. "Yeah," she said, "you are." She came back Thursday, and the following Tuesday, and the Tuesday after that. Each session pushed further, more steps, longer duration, the gait pattern growing smoother and more natural as the calibration refined, and her neuromuscular system rebuilt its confidence in pathways that had been quiet, but had never, as Ethan had told her, actually forgotten. By the 3rd week, she was walking the full length of the bars unassisted except for the machine, fingertips barely touching the steel. By the 4th week, she was walking without touching the bars at all. He didn't make a speech about it. He just watched her walk past the end of the bars, 3 steps beyond them into open floor, and then stop and look back at him with an expression that required no interpretation from any distance. And he said, "How did that feel?" And she said, "Like something I used to take for granted." And he said, "Yeah." And neither of them needed to say anything else. Saturday arrived. The Saturday she'd told her father to come.
Ethan was aware, from 6 a.m. onward, of a specific kind of pressure that wasn't anxiety exactly, but was related to it. Richard Bennett walking back into this garage was a complicated thing. Not because Ethan was afraid of him. He wasn't, and hadn't been since the first morning when he'd pushed the money back. But because the man's presence changed the weight of the room. And today, the weight of the room needed to stay exactly right. The Bentley pulled up at 9:45. This time, when the rear door opened, Richard Bennett did not have the composed, controlled posture of 3 months ago. He was still silver-haired, still well-dressed, still held himself like a man who had spent decades being the tallest structure in any room. But something in him was different. He moved toward the garage door more carefully, more humbly, like a man who had been thinking, for 3 months, about what it means to push money across a table at someone who pushes it back. He stopped at the bay entrance. Ava was already at the bars, already in the frame. She looked at her father and said, "Come in, Dad." He came in. He looked at the frame around his daughter's legs. He looked at the parallel bars. He looked at Ethan, who was standing at the control station, and he opened his mouth to say something and then apparently decided against whatever it was and closed it again. "Ready?" Ethan said to Ava. "Ready," she said. She walked. Not the careful, concentrated steps of the early sessions. This was something more settled, more owned. The movement of a person who has spent 4 weeks rebuilding a relationship with her own body and is no longer performing it, just doing it. 6 steps to the end of the bars. 2 steps past them. Turn. 8 steps back. She stopped and looked at her father. Richard Bennett had not moved from the spot where he'd stopped near the bay entrance. He was standing with his hands at his sides and his jaw working, and his eyes doing something that a man of his particular construction clearly had no good infrastructure for, because the infrastructure had never been needed in boardrooms or acquisition meetings or any of the situations that had shaped him. He was completely undone. Quietly, privately, without any dramatics. Just undone. The way a very strong thing comes undone when the specific force it was never built to resist finally arrives. "Ava," he said. Just her name. Just that. "Hi, Dad," she said. He crossed the bay. He didn't have any words left, apparently, and he didn't try for them. He just wrapped his arms around his daughter, who was standing on her own feet in this garage that smelled like motor oil and bad coffee and 6 years of stubborn private work. And he held on. Ethan looked away, gave them the room. He looked at the control readout, at the status panel, at the parallel bars, all the ordinary objects of the last 3 months, and let the moment belong to them. After a while, Richard straightened. He wiped his face with the back of his hand in a single brisk motion, the gesture of a man getting back to himself, or a version of himself that could function. And he turned and looked at Ethan. Ethan looked back at him. "I owe you an apology," Richard said. His voice was rough at the edges. "The way I came in here, the money, the way I—" He stopped. "I treated you like a vendor and my daughter like a product to be fixed. And I've been thinking about that since the day she called me and told me what was happening here." He paused. "I'm sorry." Ethan considered him for a moment. "She did the work," he said. "I just built the machine."
No, Ava said from behind her father. That's not... She did the work, Ethan said again, steadily. Everything I built is only useful because she was willing to get in it and try. That's hers. I just made sure the machine was ready when she was. Richard looked at him. Still, he said, I was wrong. Yes, Ethan said, you were. No anger in it, no score being settled, just the fact, plain and accepted and now past. We're good. Richard nodded slowly. Then he looked around the garage, at the drawings still visible through the back room door, at the tools and the workbench, and the terrible coffee maker, and the steel bars welded to the floor of the bay, and something changed in his face. Not the businessman assessment from the first visit. Something quieter. More like understanding arriving after a long trip. She told me you built this after losing your sister, he said. Yeah. How long did it take? 6 years. Richard was quiet for a moment. Alone, in here, every night. Most nights. Richard looked at him for a long time. I build things too, he said. I've built a lot of things, but I've never... He stopped. I've never built something like that. I don't know if I could. He wasn't flattering. He was stating something he'd clearly worked out recently and was still getting used to. What do you want to do with it? The device. Beyond Ava. There are a lot of people like Ava, Ethan said. I know. People who've been told the right version of no by the right combination of specialists and insurers, and they've accepted it because they didn't have anybody building something different in a garage somewhere. I know that too, Richard said. He was very still. I've been thinking about that since she called me. He paused. I want to help you. Not the way I came in here the first time. Not buying it, not acquiring it. He looked at Ethan directly. I want to help you get it to the people who need it. Proper testing, regulatory pathway, manufacturing at scale, all of it, whatever it takes. My foundation has the infrastructure. You have the thing worth building. He paused. What I'm asking is whether you'd let me be part of what comes next. As a partner, not a buyer. Ethan looked at him for a moment. Then he looked at Ava. She was watching him with that expression he'd come to know well, honest and direct, and carrying something that was for him specifically, that she wasn't trying to hide anymore. I'd need control over the design process, Ethan said, turning back to Richard. Every iteration. Nothing goes to a patient without my sign-off on the engineering. Agreed. And Ava is part of the clinical development. She's a physical therapist, and she's been inside the device. That perspective doesn't get sidelined when the white coats show up. Richard glanced at his daughter. Agreed. And I keep the garage, Ethan said. This place stays exactly what it is. Richard looked slightly surprised by that one. Of course. Because people like Ava don't always end up in funded programs, Ethan said. Sometimes they end up in a town like this one, with nobody to call. And I want there to always be somewhere they can end up. The garage was very quiet. Richard Bennett, who had put $100,000 on this workbench 3 months ago and been handed it back, looked at the man who'd handed it back and said, "You have a deal." They shook hands over the same workbench. The months that followed moved fast and slow in the way that significant things do. Fast in the aggregate, slow in the individual days of hard work and setbacks and incremental progress. The Bennett Foundation opened a proper development facility 20 minutes from Millhaven. A team of biomedical engineers came aboard. Ava led the clinical protocol design, working alongside people who had credentials she didn't, and who quickly learned that credentials were not the same as understanding, and that the woman who had been inside the device knew things the textbooks hadn't gotten to yet. Ethan went to the facility 3 days a week and kept the garage the other 4. Ray and Marcus got raises. Marcus stopped needing help with the knife parts. Gracie got a response from the IAU. It was a form letter, but it was a response, and she considered this a partial victory and declared her intentions to follow up. And Ava kept coming to the garage. Not for sessions anymore. The work had moved to the facility, properly equipped and staffed. She came because the garage was the place where the thing had started. And some things deserve to keep their original location in your life, regardless of where they lead you. She came on Tuesday evenings usually, and sometimes Saturday mornings, and she sat on the stool in the back room with a cup of the terrible coffee, which she had, over time, developed a genuine tolerance for, or possibly a fondness for, which she denied. And they talked the way people talk when they have been through something real together and come out the other side of it still standing. One Tuesday evening in February, 4 months after the first steps at the parallel bars, Ava walked into the garage from the parking lot. No chair, no bars, no frame. Just her own legs, her own balance. Still not perfect, there was a slight hesitation in the right side, a gait asymmetry that the clinical team was continuing to address, and probably always would be to some degree. Not perfect, not easy, but real. She walked through the bay door and found Ethan at the workbench, doing what he always did, which was working on something. And she stood in the doorway, and he looked up, and he saw her, and for a moment, neither of them said anything. Then Gracie's voice came from the stairs. "Ava!" The enthusiasm of someone who had been updated by text message and had been waiting with considerable impatience for this specific arrival. Gracie came down the stairs at a speed that made Ethan briefly consider the structural integrity of the railing, and crossed the bay and threw her arms around Ava's waist. Standing Ava. Upright Ava. Ava whose hands caught her and held her up, and said, muffled into Ava's coat, "I knew it! I knew it! I knew it!" Ava held on. Her face was over Gracie's head, turned slightly, and she was looking at Ethan. And the smile on her face was not the almost smile from week 3, and not the brief, surprised, real laugh from that evening, and not even the full, overwhelmed smile from the first day at the bars. It was something past all of those, something settled and earned and permanent, the face of a person who has walked back into their own life and found it waiting. Ethan stood at the workbench with his oil-stained hands and looked at the two of them and felt something complete itself in him. Quietly, without ceremony, the way a long job finishes, not with noise, but with the particular silence of a thing that has been done right. Later, after dinner, after Gracie had gone to bed, Ethan stood in the back room alone and looked at the empty work table where the frame had been built and from which it had been carried to the facility, and from which it would eventually reach people in places he would never see. People whose names he would never know. People who had been told some version of, "You'll never," and who would discover, as Ava had discovered, that never was a word that hadn't met the right machine yet. He thought about Lena. He thought about a girl who had gone out of the world with things unlived inside her, and the grief of a younger brother who hadn't known how to fix it, and had spent 6 years in a back room above a garage in Ohio, trying anyway. He looked at the empty table. He said, out loud, quietly, to no one and to her, "I kept it." Then he turned off the light, went upstairs, and went to sleep. Because tomorrow the garage would open at 7, and there would be engines to fix, and a town that kept quietly going, and a daughter who had opinions about the solar system, and a promise already made to the next version of this work that was only just beginning. And Ethan Cole, mechanic, single father, the man who pushed the money back, had never once in his life needed more than a reason to keep going. He had plenty of reasons now. That was enough. That had always been enough.